I'd like to welcome everyone to our Lectionary Bible Study. My name is David Mosser, and I'm coming from my office at Salado United Methodist Church. Today we have sort of odd text for a Father's Day because we have a story about Abraham and his two sons and his wife and his concubine. And I would like to do that text first, and then we will turn briefly to Psalm 86, select verses from that. What I want you to know about this story that comes from Genesis 21:8 through 21 is it's a story about Abraham's two sons. The first one born was named Ishmael. The second one born was Isaac, which means laughter in Hebrew. And the way this happened was that Sarah was very elderly, as was Abraham, but there was a promise of Abraham having a son, his seed that would make a great nation of him. And as time wore on, Sarah got more and more desperate, and so she used a ploy that infertile women used in ancient times, which was to provide her husband one of the slave girls out of harem. And she presented this woman named Hagar to Abraham, and they ended up having a son whose name was Ishmael. And Hagar was an Egyptian woman, and so this wasn't the son of the Hebrew people. This was the son of an Egyptian and Abraham. So one of the things that I want to talk to us about is that in the Bible and in virtually all stories that are interesting anyway, is that there are multiple points of view. And one of the disturbing things about this text for modern 21st century Christian people who have some sort of a moral sense is that Hagar and Ishmael were cruelly and unethically treated by Sarah first, and then Abraham, who becomes complicit in this particular story. But you also need to understand that from Sarah's point of view and from Abraham's point of view, Isaac needed to be protected because he was the person through whom Israel would be born, and that there would be many tribes, 12 in fact, and a whole nation of Israel, the Hebrew people, the people of God. And so you have these two competing factions. One is of a slave woman versus the, I guess you could call her the queen of the harem. She was, in fact, Abraham's wife, not only his first wife, but really his only wife at this point. And then you have the competition that Sarah, the primary wife, has with Hagar, who was a concubine, who did, after all, provide Abraham with a son, who was named Ishmael. The name Ishmael is not in this particular text, but that is who we are talking about. So I'd like to say, first of all, there's more than one point of view going on, and even though we may see Sarah as kind of cruel in a way, we also need to understand that she was protecting her child, the child of the promise, her son Isaac, whose name means laughter. And after all, these two boys were half brothers because they shared the same father. In patriarchal society, of course, which we do not live in right now, although there are some people that want to go back to it, we have a society that is dominated by men. In fact, one of the surprising things about the Bible is how much influence women have in these particular stories. Later on, we will see that Rachel and Rebecca each wield a great amount of influence in their families, as does Sarah in this particular story, as we will soon see. These two half-brothers end up to be brothers of two nations. One, Israel, the other, the Ishmaelites or the Midianites. Sometimes they are lumped together as people from the same father. As we all know, Abraham is the father of many nations, and he is considered to be the spiritual father of the Hebrews, of Christians, and also of Muslims. And so let's start the text at chapter 21, verse 8. It says, the child grew and was weaned, that is, Isaac was weaned. And on the day of weaning, which happened, in this case, probably about 3 years old, they have a great feast. And it's a feast where all the neighbors are invited, and they have a big party, basically. And then we have what I call the biblical but. But Sarah saw the son of Hagar, the Egyptians, whom she had borne to Abraham, playing with her son Isaac. So here is where the controversy starts. Sarah sees Hagar's son, and the two boys are playing. In fact, there's playing words in Hebrew about they were laughing together, because Isaac means laughter. And I think that Sarah was jealous or protective or worried that this firstborn son, Ishmael, the one born to Hagar, would end up usurping Isaac's place in the family. And so she says to Abraham, cast out the slave woman and her son. And you notice that she doesn't call either one of these two persons by their name, just slave woman and son. For the son of this slave woman shall not inherit along with my son Isaac. And so you can see this separation coming. Then, one of the Bible's great understatements, it says, the matter was very distressing to Abraham on account of his son. Now, you are left to wonder which son distressed him, but probably both, but at this point, mostly Ishmael. But God said to Abraham, do not be distressed because of the boy and because of your slave woman. Whatever Sarah says to you, do as she tells you, for it is through Isaac that offspring shall be named for you. As for the son of the slave woman, I will make a nation out of him also, because he is your offspring. And so here we have the two nations being lifted up in the text, and Abraham, each one of his sons, will be the progenitor of these new nations. So Abraham rose early in the morning. He took bread and a skin of water, and he gave it to Hagar, putting it on her shoulder along with the child, and sent her away. This seems very cruel, but obviously after God told Abraham to do it, and as we know from previous stories in Genesis, Abraham is nothing if not obedient to the word of God. And so he sends her away, and after she departed, she goes out into the wilderness of Beersheba. When the water in the skin was gone, she cast the child under one of the bushes, and then she went and sat down opposite him a good way off, about the distance of a bow shot. Now, perhaps we can estimate how far someone can shoot an arrow, perhaps 100 yards, perhaps farther. But she is away from him because she said, do not let me look on the death of the child. She doesn't say my child, she says the child. And so there she is, just waiting. There's kind of a countdown as to when the child would die and be put out of the family constellation of Abraham, Sarah, and Isaac. But as Hagar sat opposite him, she lifted up her voice and she wept. She raises her voice up to heaven. This will happen in many years hence, when Israel lifts up its voice to God when it's in slavery in Egypt. And so we are told here in Genesis what we will be told in Exodus, that God heard the voice. He heard the voice of the boy. The mother's crying, praying perhaps, but God hears the voice of the boy. And an angel of God called to Hagar from heaven and said to her, "What troubles you, Hagar? Do not be afraid, for God has heard the voice of the boy where he is. Come, lift up the boy and hold him fast with your hand, for I will make a great nation of him." And so here the promise is reiterated as the child is saved by this angel, this angelos, this messenger from God. Then God opened her eyes, and she saw a well of water. And she went and filled her skin with water, gave the boy a drink, and God was with the boy. And you notice that in the Bible, this happens several places. John the Baptizer, we're told that God was with him, and also that God was also with Jesus. And so in this sense, God was with the boy, and he grew up and he lived in the wilderness, and he became an expert with the bow. In other words, he was sort of a person of nature and did not live in cities or towns, but scavenged out in the wilderness for food. And he lived in the wilderness of Paran, and his mother got him a wife from the land of Egypt. And so from Egypt, Ishmael got his wife, and they become Ishmaelites, as I said, or Midianites, and they were people that lived in the Sinai wilderness, basically. Now, if you will, I would invite you to flip over to Psalm 86. I'll read first 10 verses and then verses 16 and 17. This is a song of complaint. Some scholars believe, because of some of the terminology in here, that it was a prayer prayed anonymously by one of the kings of Israel or Judah. And when we say a psalm of complaint, it's very much like prayers that many Americans use today when things are going fine. Most of us don't give God a thought, but it's when we're in trouble, when we're in the emergency room, when a neighbor's house is burning down, when we have to visit the funeral home, when people are sick, or when there are things going on in the nation or war, then all of a sudden we turn to God. Well, evidently, this perhaps royal sovereign is having a tough time, and there's threats to him and the nation, and there's troubles that he is trying to get Yahweh, God, to intervene in and give him relief from. And so what this psalm is it's an act of faith, because this particular prayer deeply believes that God will come to his rescue. And it's a psalm that shows great confidence in God's ability to respond to someone like him. It begins, "Incline your ear, O Lord, and answer me, for I am poor and needy." That phrase, poor and needy, is one that is written on some cups and carved into some walls that have been excavated in the area of Palestine. "Preserve my life, for I am devoted to you. Save your servant who trusts in you." And so he's trying to curry God's favor by saying that not only is he a servant, but he also trusts in God. "You are my God. Be gracious to me, O Lord, for to you do I cry all day long. In other words, he prays, like Paul writes in some of his letters, pray unceasingly. That's what this particular psalmist is doing. Gladden the soul of your servant. For to you, O Lord, I lift up my soul. For you, O Lord, are good and forgiving, abounding in steadfast love to all who call on you. And that would be him, because he's certainly calling upon God right now. Then he goes on to sort of implore God, beg God even, give ear, O Lord, to my prayer. Listen to the cry of my supplication. In the day of my trouble I call on you, for you will answer me. There's none like you among the gods, O Lord, nor is there any works like yours. All the nations you have made shall come and bow before you, O Lord, and shall glorify your name. These aren't just praises that are heaped upon God, one after the other, to show that the supplicant or the prayer is deeply convinced that this God is one who will come to his rescue. For you are great and do wondrous things. You alone are God. And that's a sort of a reflection of Hebrew monotheism, that there is only one God. So now he asks this question, or he makes this request. Turn to me and be gracious to me. Give your strength to your servant. Save the child of your serving girl. And for that reason, perhaps this psalm was chosen to be matched with the serving girl Hagar from the Genesis story. And then finally he ends by saying, show me a sign of your favor, so those who hate me may see it and be put to shame, because you, Lord, have helped me and comforted me. That is, in the face of my enemies, those who are against me, thou preparest the table before me in the presence of mine enemies. That's this same kind of idea that is, if we can demonstrate to our enemies that God is on our side, it will lessen the sort of rebuke and torment that we receive. There's much more that could be said about both of these texts, but I want to thank you for being with us today, and ask you if you have any questions about any of these texts or anything, that if you would email your questions to Slato United Methodist Church, we would be gratified, and I will get back with you with answers as best I can. So thank you very much for being with us today, and I'll see you later in the week.